Hello again from Berlin. Let's dive into our passage here in First Timothy chapter 3. Last time I talked about the issue of self control. And in my opinion, self control is a strong indicator of an individual's maturity. Mature people have a, a a good measure of self control. And self control is very difficult for immature people. Duh. I mean, that's pretty self evident. One of the aspects of self discipline that I don't see, I unfortunately don't see it enough in my own life, and I broadly in terms of our culture I don't see enough of, I don't see very much of, certainly not enough of. It connects with self control, and it is delayed gratification. The I don't want to be, I try not to be an alarmist, but there are a lot of things about our world that are in crisis mode. And one of the crises that we're experiencing has to do with this unwillingness to delay gratification. We want it now. So we have a almost overwhelming amount of consumer debt among average families in America, that if they had to pay off their credit cards immediately, they just simply couldn't. We've made a practice, many of us, I'd say our culture as a whole, has made a practice of living beyond our means. See, people with self control have trained themselves to understand the difference between what I want and what I need, and I will get this when I have the means for it and not before. That's a foreign concept. Now, my parents grew up in a time, during my parents' lifetime, credit became normal. I mean, there was a time when if you needed a washing machine, you had to have the cash. Everything was a cash thing, perhaps other than houses. And then in the 60s, is my memory of the very first credit card that I ever heard about. My mom had a pennies credit card, and there were a lot of school years we wouldn't have had school clothes if it hadn't been for the pennies credit card. Well, that was helpful to our family. And then came the Bank America card, which now is Visa, and it's a variety of permutations now, dozens of different kinds of credit cards which promote and profit from consumer debt. This wouldn't be possible. They could not make a profit if it weren't for the fact that people, especially we the people, are very susceptible to wanting what we want now, not later. We are not very good at delayed gratification, and part of the reason we're not very good at that is because we haven't practiced it. I want to suggest that for mature, growing Christians, there's not a tirade against credit cards. I have one and I use it. But I have learned how to delay my gratification. And if I don't have the means, I can't buy it. I didn't come equipped with that. I had to learn this. And over the last 30 years, it has been quite a process of learning how to live in this way. And it all goes back to a virtue that God is growing in every believer's life. The virtue is self-control. This last of the aspects of the fruit of the Spirit. And if a man aspires to be an elder, an overseer, a bishop, he desires a noble task. And one of the things that qualifies him for this noble task is that he demonstrates self-control. I'll briefly go back and remind you, this is not about an attempt to control others. No. This is completely and fully about self-control. Okay. So then he goes on to say, well, he says, let's just start at verse 2 again. Now the overseer is to be above reproach, faithful to his wife, temperate, self-controlled, respectable, hospitable, we talked about those things, and able to teach. I have a dear friend who was an elder at one of the churches I served, and I feel like he did a really admirable job as an elder. But he confessed to me once, I probably shouldn't be an elder. And I said, well, why in the world would you say that? He said, because I'm not able to teach. I said, what do you mean? He said, don't ever put me up in front of a class and hope that I'll be able to teach. Okay, I knew this was true of him. He was a quiet person, but he was a wise person. And I also knew that in my own life, I had come to him for wise counsel, and he had taught me. The setting and context for teaching here could be, and often would have been, and would still be today, but in Paul's day would have been in a position to teach the church. But that's not the only context for teaching. Sometimes the most enduring, deepest, best lessons are taught one-to-one. And an elder, this overseer, has to be able to teach. Now, what makes it possible for someone to be able to teach? I'm going to give you my opinion. First of all, they have to know the material. I can hardly teach you about something I don't know about. I can share ignorance. I might be able to direct you to various sources that can take you farther than I can take you. And I think that's only intelligent. But I have to know what I'm teaching. Okay, so the first thing is I've got to have this background. And in the church, what is the background? Do you need to know Greek and Hebrew? Do you need to know ancient history? And I'll tell you, sort of. For me, I don't know Greek. I don't know Hebrew. And I am not a scholar of ancient history, but I do know how to harvest that information so that it can be applied into what I teach. So, okay, the answer is yes and no. A second thing about what makes it possible, why would a person be able to teach? Number one, they need to know the material. And number two, they have to be able to somehow articulate the material. Now, everybody's not wired to stand up in front of a big crowd and go for 25 or 30 minutes and close with a dead dog and poem illustration. That's preaching. And teaching it's a little different. There's a lot of preaching that is loaded with teaching. But the kind of teaching that Paul's talking about here is the transmission of not just information, but life on life. What's the objective? To draw people into a deeper, closer, more functioning, and dynamic relationship with Jesus. So you got to know the material. You got to be able to articulate it. And the last thing I'll say is you have to demonstrate that this material actually works and actually matters. And let me just give you an illustration. Have you ever sat under a teacher who could tell you more than you wanted to know about the subject, but it wasn't working for them, right? That I'm not going to say that disqualifies them, but it sure does put a ceiling on the effectiveness of their teaching. So this person who is desiring to be an overseer needs to know the material. You need to know the scriptures, and you need to know on a personal level the Savior. The second thing is you got to be able to articulate it. Everybody's not the same, and I'll tell you that you don't have to be poetic, you don't have to be an orator, but you do have to be able to talk intelligently about what you know. With practice, anybody can do that. Okay. And then you have to demonstrate in your life that what you're teaching actually works and matters, which connects with, he talked about the respectable aspect. Yeah, my example, able to teach. And then in verse 3 he says, not given to drunkenness. A lot of people, especially in conservative backgrounds, from which I come, that was a big one, and it was hit hard and often. Not given to drunkenness. Well, let's think about what that was like. In Paul's day, what was it like? Who would be identified as given to drunkenness? That's a person whose habit was they got drunk. They're given to drunkenness. If a person of self-control is not going to be given to drunkenness, is this a prohibition against all alcoholic beverage? Some would say yes. I'll let you decide that. But I will say it is a prohibition against drunkenness. There's no good reason for a follower of Jesus to get drunk. and in this role as an overseer, as a bishop, one who is given to that, who has a pattern of this, they are in no position to lead by the example of their life and lead for the benefit of the family. When people are given to drunkenness, and I know it sounds judgmental, I only want it to be observational, but my observation is those who are given to drunkenness most often have their own interests first at heart. Now they might tell you, and emotionally they might believe that they have other people's interests at heart. You know what? If you've got other people's interests at heart, if your family's interests are at heart, you're not going to be getting drunk. I do not believe that alcoholism in your history disqualifies you. I don't. But I believe alcoholism in your current story would. And my thing is, for that person, let's get them help. Because until they can forsake being given to drunkenness, they're not fully available for God's design and agenda and for helping other people. Well, there's many reasons why I feel strongly about not given to drunkenness. My reasons, I think, are valid. But as far as whether that's going to be your guide, that's up to you. I do know this. An overseer must not be given to drunkenness. See you next time on Soul Care with Stevie Boy.